I had been working as a driver for a delivery service for the past 2 years. The job was quite flexible, fitting well with my personal life and family, especially during early morning shifts when the streets were still quiet and traffic was light. But one morning I encountered an eerie event that I could never forget. It lingered in my mind like a warning about hidden dangers. That morning, I was driving my small truck on an empty road. The early morning air was cool and the city was still asleep. I received an urgent order from a 24/7 cafe just a few blocks away. Normally, I wouldn't think much of it, but this time, an inexplicable sense of unease crept over me. It was an instinctive feeling, as if something wasn't right, though I had neither seen nor heard anything alarming. When I arrived at the cafe, I noticed a man standing at the entrance. He was wearing a tattered old coat with frayed elbows and looked like he hadn't bathed in days. He paced around the parking area with jittery movements, constantly glancing over his shoulder as if someone was following him. He made me uneasy. Still, wanting to finish my job, I decided to stop and pick up the order. The man approached my vehicle and I rolled down the window. He asked for a ride, said he was in a hurry and didn't have enough money for a taxi. I should have refused immediately, but for some reason, I agreed. Maybe it was the overwhelming desperation on his face, or perhaps just a fleeting moment of sympathy. He climbed into the passenger seat, and the moment he shut the door, I regretted it. He sat in complete silence, staring at me through the windshield. His gaze never wavered, not blinking, not shifting, just staring. I tried to focus on the road, turning on the radio to ease the tension, but as soon as the music started, he suddenly shouted, "Turn that thing off!" His voice was hoarse, filled with pressure. I immediately complied, my heart pounding as I tried to stay calm. After a while, he began speaking. At first, it was just small talk, but gradually his tone became stranger. He asked if I had ever given a ride to someone I didn't really know. I chuckled nervously and replied, "Sometimes you just have to trust people." He didn't laugh. Instead, he smirked in a twisted way and continued telling me a bizarre story of his own. He claimed that he had once worked for a transportation service but had to quit because a group of customers had taken advantage of him. His story was disjointed, sometimes illogical, but what sent chills down my spine was how he ended it. You know, sometimes you don't realize how dangerous someone is until it's too late. His words hung in the air, and I started feeling genuinely afraid. He kept talking, alternating between vague apologies and scattered stories. He repeatedly insisted that he never meant to hurt anyone, but the regret in his voice only made me more anxious. Just 5 minutes before his supposed stop, he suddenly shouted that I was going the wrong way. I was certain I wasn't, but out of fear, I pulled over. As soon as I stopped, a police car appeared behind us. My heart nearly stopped. The man beside me immediately ducked, trying to avoid the headlights. When the police car passed, he sat up, flashed a cold smile, and said, "You're lucky." Then he opened the door and disappeared into the darkness. I sat there, trembling, unable to believe what had just happened. When I got home, I searched online and discovered that a bank robbery had taken place in the nearby area that very night. Police were searching for a suspect who matched the description of the man I had just encountered. Since then, I've been much more cautious about helping strangers. It was a life lesson about how misplaced trust can lead to unforeseen consequences. And I also installed a surveillance camera in my vehicle, a decision I'm extremely glad I made.
My name is Alex, and the girl I love most in this world, Clara, has changed my life in ways no one could ever imagine. We met at the University of Chicago, a school famous for its freezing winters and intense intellectual atmosphere. But amid the bone-chilling cold, our love blossomed like a small flame igniting from the snow. Clara was from Seattle, while I grew up in Boston. Both of us were strangers to the Midwest. Here is the full English translation of your story. My name is Alex, and the girl I love most in this world, Clara, has changed my life in ways no one could ever imagine. We met at the University of Chicago, a school famous for its freezing winters and intense intellectual atmosphere. But amid the bone-chilling cold, Our love blossomed like a small flame igniting from the snow. Clara was from Seattle, while I grew up in Boston. Both of us were strangers to the Midwest, but it was precisely this shared sense of unfamiliarity that brought us closer together. We often joke that among the thousands of students here, only we truly understood the feeling of being outsiders. Gradually, we formed a small tradition. Every winter, when the holiday break began, we would drive to Clara's home first before I returned to mine. It was a journey filled with memories where we stopped by small roadside cafes, listened to classic jazz, and shared childhood stories. This year, everything was the same. After a cozy evening with my family on Christmas Eve, we climbed into our familiar SUV to begin the 6-hour drive to Seattle. The road passed through quiet rural areas covered in pristine white snow, resembling a fairy tale painting. The car's headlights illuminated the narrow road ahead, casting faint golden streaks onto the snowy landscape. Clara had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, her sleek black hair cascading over her shoulder, her delicate face glowing softly under the dim dashboard light. I looked at her for a moment, feeling a warmth inside. She always brought me a sense of peace, as if the chaotic world outside could never touch us. Then, at around 2 a.m., my phone rang, shattering the silence. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Without thinking much, I ignored the call, assuming it was just a late-night telemarketer. Clara stirred slightly but didn't wake up. However, less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, I felt irritated. Who would call at this hour? I decided to mute my phone and kept driving, but then it vibrated again. And again, each call was only minutes apart. My patience began to wear thin. Finally, on the 4th ring, I picked up the call in frustration. Hello. My voice was sharp, my eyes squinting slightly from the tension. The other end was silent. Only faint static noise, as if someone was struggling to connect from a faraway place. I was about to hang up when a deep male voice finally spoke. Alex, don't hang up. My heart pounded. How did this person know my name? Who is this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my hands on the steering wheel tightened. Cold sweat formed on my forehead, despite the car's comfortable heating. The voice responded, I need your help. Don't ask why. Just do exactly as I say. Then he started describing my car in detail, the license plate, even the exact road we were driving on. He knew everything. How do you know this? I stammered, my hands trembling. I glanced at Clara, afraid she might wake up and get worried. But she remained fast asleep, her breathing steady, her face serene like a flawless marble statue. Don't waste time, the voice said sternly. In 10 minutes, get off this road. Do not cross the next bridge. If you don't believe me, you will regret it for the rest of your life. I froze. My body shook, but I forced myself to focus on the road. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Should I follow his instructions? Or was this just a sick joke? But how did he know Clara's name? How did he know where we were? In the end, I took a chance. When we reached the turn leading to the bridge, instead of driving straight, I swerved onto a small, narrow side road. Clara stirred awake due to the sudden movement. What's going on? She asked, her voice groggy, but her eyes wide with confusion. She pushed her hair behind her ear, sitting up straight and looking at me intently. Nothing, I replied, trying to mask the panic in my chest. Just avoiding some traffic. We drove for a few more minutes before I pulled over on the side of the road to catch my breath. Clara looked at me with suspicion. I have a bad feeling about this, she said softly, her voice filled with concern. Her eyes darted around as if searching for a sign, for an explanation. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. A message from the unknown number? You did the right thing. Look behind you. I turned my head. In the distance, a blinding light from an accident scene came into view. The bridge we were supposed to cross had completely collapsed, swept away by the powerful current of melted ice. Cars were stranded below, scattered like broken toys in the ravine, and the piercing sound of emergency sirens filled the night air. The scene looked like something out of a horror movie, flashing red and blue lights blending with the white snow, creating a chaotic and eerie spectacle. Clara covered her mouth, horrified. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes were wide with sheer terror. Her skin had turned pale, and her lips pressed tightly together as if she was too shocked to speak. I didn't answer. I just sat there, staring at my phone screen where the unknown number was still displayed. No more messages came. The mysterious man had vanished, as if he had never existed. To this day, I still don't know who he was or how he knew everything. But from that night on, I never took life for granted again. Because sometimes in the midst of darkness and chaos, miracles happen, no matter where they come from or who they come from. And as I looked at Clara, her face slowly regaining its color, her eyes still reflecting traces of fear, but also gratitude, I realized one thing. There are moments when life and death are separated by a single decision. And sometimes that decision comes from a stranger's voice in the night.
I grew up in a small town called Willow Creek, nestled deep in a valley in western Oregon. There wasn't much in town besides forests and a few old coffee shops. So, when we were young, my friends and I found ways to entertain ourselves by exploring forgotten places, mostly abandoned factories or old storage warehouses. We loved the thrill of adventure, even though we knew it wasn't safe. One day, we heard rumors about an abandoned wooden house deep in the forest, near Silverwood Lake. No one knew the exact address, but people called it Mrs. Stone's house. It once belonged to a wealthy family in the early 20th century, but mysteriously disappeared from maps. Some said the family left after a tragic accident, while others believed the house had been haunted for decades. Either way, for us, it was the perfect spot for a late-night adventure. That night, there were 7 of us. Me, Liam, Rachel, Noah, Ellie, Zach, Mia, and Sam. We brought flashlights, a few cans of beer, and an indescribable sense of excitement. The path to the house was rough, overgrown with weeds and thorny bushes. When we finally arrived, the house stood under the dim moonlight, its windows shattered, roof caving in, and wooden walls rotting. It looked as though no one had set foot there for decades. We entered through an unlocked front door, and the floor creaked beneath our every step. Inside, it was pitch dark and freezing, with a musty smell that filled our lungs. The house had 2 floors, but most of the furniture was destroyed. On the ground floor, all that remained was a long, dust-covered table and a few broken chairs. But what intrigued us the most was the basement below. A wooden staircase led down to the basement, and of course, being reckless kids, we decided to go. The basement was divided into 3 small rooms, each shrouded in darkness. The first room we entered was filled with rotting wooden crates, a few broken chairs, and a torn-up rug. We sat down, cracked open our beers, and started chatting. At that moment, Zach told a dumb joke, making everyone burst into laughter. But our fun was short-lived. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from somewhere in the basement, a sharp, clanging sound like metal crashing against metal. We all stopped laughing and looked at each other, our hearts pounding. At first, I thought maybe someone had accidentally knocked something over, but no one had moved. Then, Rachel, Noah, and Ellie screamed and bolted up the stairs, leaving me, Zach, Mia, and Sam behind. We tried to act tough, but in reality, we were all terrified. However, no one wanted to admit it. In the end, we decided to investigate the source of the noise. Holding our flashlights up, we cautiously moved toward the last room, the one we hadn't dared enter earlier. This room was much smaller than the others, and the first thing that caught my eye was an old dresser. Its mirror was cracked, with strange reddish stains smeared across the surface. At first, I thought it was paint, but as I got closer, I realized it was sticky, as if it had been freshly applied. Zach whispered, "Don't touch it." But we couldn't tear our eyes away from the mirror. In the reflection, I caught a glimpse of someone standing behind me. I spun around immediately, but there was no one there. Then I saw the photograph. Resting on the dresser was an old picture of a man in a black suit, his face stern and his eyes piercing. He held a thick book in his hands, staring directly at me. A cold chill ran down my spine. We didn't have time to process what was happening, because at that moment, the noise returned. This time, distinct footsteps from the next room. None of us needed to discuss what to do next. All 4 of us bolted out of the basement, raced up the stairs, and sprinted out of the house. Outside, Rachel, Noah, and Ellie were already waiting, their faces pale. None of us spoke the entire way home. As I glanced back at the house from a distance, I could swear I saw a faint light flickering in one of the windows, even though we were sure we hadn't turned on any lights inside. After that night, we never spoke about it again. A few years later, I returned to the area and discovered that the house had burned down. Nothing remained except ashes and the foundation. I don't know if anyone ever investigated its history, but I've always believed that house held a secret, one better left undiscovered.